Okay, so let's look a little bit at now. We're going to look at the new food label, but remember, some of your labels will have the old one, but all this information that we're going to look at is still going to apply. So this, you guys have this diagram, and it goes into a lot of detail. This is in your ebook, but I want to go over it because I think that there's a lot of things on here, and it's hard to know which to prioritize and when. So the very first thing that I would say you look at right away is start from the top. Look at what the serving size is. So for instance, this is 2/3 of a cup. Now, if you've ever measured something, you can visualize what 2/3 of a cup is. Sometimes it'll say 1 ounce. Like if you look at a package of almonds, it'll tell you 1 ounce. Sometimes it'll tell you how many almonds, not always. So ideally, food companies are supposed to list their food, the serving size in a household measure that people can understand. Not always. If you look at cheese, a lot of times it's 1 ounce. So the only way you would really know how much 1 ounce was is if you were to put that on a food scale and weigh it and see for yourself. It's very hard to know otherwise. So there's that. And then in parentheses, if you notice here, there's grams. So this is the serving size is 2/3 of a cup. 2/3 of a cup of this food weighs 55 grams. So if you were to put it on a food scale and you wanted to weigh it in grams, everything is standardized into grams. So you don't even have to look at the serving size. If you were to measure 2/3 of a cup and then put it on the food scale, many times you're either overestimating or underestimating. If you use like a dry measure, let's say you use a measuring cup and then you put it on a food scale, a lot of times it's never exact, but it's a decent measure. So that's because let's say it's cereal and you could pack it tighter, or like brown sugar, for instance, or peanut butter, which you can kind of like load it into the spoon. That's where you'll see a difference. And if you are having trouble, if you're following everything, if you're logging everything, but you're estimating portions, that's where I would go back and make sure your portions are in check. I wouldn't start by weighing and measuring everything, but if you're really not seeing that, you're not sure if your portions are under control because you're like, you know what, I don't really think I know what 2/3 of a cup looks like. That's the first thing you want to go back and check. Okay, so then the number of servings per container. This is helpful, but only to a certain point because there's a big margin of error. It could be up to like 20% off. So let's say it's telling us there's 8 servings per container. There might only be 6 in here, which means that if you thought there were 8, say it's a bag of potato chips and you thought there was 8 servings and you kind of like split it up by eye, well, you're probably taking in less than you thought, which is good for our waste, but it's also a way for them to give you less food. So if you ever open a bag of Cinny Pop and it's like half full, there might not be the full 8 servings in there. So that's just like a little something. So you can't always go by that, but it gives you a general idea. Okay, and so now let's look at the calories. So this is, remember, unit of energy. If we were to eat 2/3 of a cup of this, we get 230 calories. That's our energy. That's how much, if you were to burn this food, it would burn off. Very simple. If you look at nothing else over the next few weeks, because it's a lot, start to look at the calories and start to understand those. That's the starting point. Once you have that down, we can go into the fat, carbs, and protein. What many people fail to do is understand first that calories are going to determine your weight loss, are going to determine your weight status. And they'll skip to looking at just counting carbs or just counting protein or just counting fat, but neglecting the bigger picture. So that's why I have you work from like the big down to the small. So there's that. Okay, so now let's look at total fat. The total fat reflects all the different types, the good fats or the bad fats. So this tell you at 8 grams of total fat, out of that, again, 1 gram is saturated and 0 grams is trans fat. Well, where's the other 7 grams? It's coming from some kind of unsaturated fat. The reason we call these 2 out are because these are the ones that we have to worry about, because saturated fat and trans fats can contribute to cardiovascular disease. So for someone who needs to worry about this, if you have high cholesterol, you want to make sure that this is under control. Now, again, I don't know why we have to have trans fat on the label anymore, because it's pretty much always going to be 0 because they're banned in the US and the FDA is a US institution. But just because it says 0 grams of trans fat doesn't mean that there can't be some trans fat. Again, you can round on the food label. So if it has less than half a gram, they can say 0. Now, the recommendation is to make sure that you're eating less than 1 gram of trans fat per day. So let's say you have 2 foods where they're rounding up, you could be eating trans fat. So this is where we'll get into the importance of the ingredients as well and knowing what you're eating, because it does all come, I know it's a lot of stuff, but I want you to at least see where it's coming from. So for the most part, you could look at the grams of fat. Most of the packaged food you guys are going to be eating won't be that high in fat. It'll mostly be like a source of protein or a source of carbs. You don't have to get so hung up on that. That's not really where I would look first. Now we skip to cholesterol. Again, this is not so useful unless you have you have strict rules to be on a cholesterol restricted diet. So the problem with this is that science does not really agree with the cholesterol restriction anymore. This is why eggs are constantly in the news, or everyone's constantly asking how many egg yolks they can have. This is like disproved by science so many years ago, but it still comes up because it looks like it's important. It's on the label. Well, cholesterol comes from animal foods, can only come from animal foods. It is not in plant foods. So the question is, we all know that our bodies make cholesterol, and many people have high cholesterol, whether it's familial, it's inherited, or it's from diet, or a combination. And so it would make sense that if you had a high cholesterol, you wouldn't want to be eating more cholesterol. You would think it would raise it. Well, it turns out that that doesn't seem to be the problem. Actually, they find that people who are starving, or like anorexia, or starving prisoners of war or whatever, their cholesterol was higher than anyone's. Because when you don't eat cholesterol, your body makes it. So your liver gets the memo that, hey, we're out of cholesterol, let's start overproducing it. So that's why you'll see very thin people sometimes who don't eat very much have high cholesterol. So it is still important that we eat cholesterol. We need it. It's important.